Hey everyone, welcome to the new
Hello.
episode of vCluster Friday. And today we have two special guests. We have Ole, CT of Testkube, and we have Atul, who is a senior developer advocate from Infra Cloud, which is now improving. And today we will be talking about one of the awesome projects from the CNCF Landscape, which is Testkube. So hi everyone, how are you doing?
Okay. Good. Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And Atul?
Likewise, excited to be here, Hrittik. Good to see you.
Awesome. So Ole, you can start with a bit about background about you and TestCube, how the project came into,
Sure.
and
Yeah, sure. Okay, you're gonna have to stop me because I can talk a lot about TestCube, but very short about me. I've been doing computing since late '90s. Maybe things I've worked on that are known are I was very instrumental in the Swagger ecosystem while I worked at SmartPair. So I was the chairman of the Open API initiative and worked a lot with standards and tooling around Swagger. Also created a tool called SoapUI, which many people don't know anymore, but it was very popular 10, 15, 20 years ago. It was an API testing tool. But now at TestCube, TestCube is a project that we started 4 years ago. And it came from the frustration with CI tools and CD tools not being really great at testing and test execution at scale, especially if you're kind of in teams where you have a lot of QA people who might need to run tests out of bounds or need to run tests, on a schedule or related to some infrastructure changes, etc. Just using like Jenkins or things like that or GitHub Actions to run your tests was just didn't go very far. Those tools are not great at like reporting and analytics and troubleshooting. They're not great at kind of scaling your tests if you're doing massive load tests and that kind of stuff. So we felt there's a need for a platform to really focus on continuous testing. And then as Kubernetes kind of rose in popularity, Kubernetes felt like a great underlying orchestration engine for running tests at scale. So basically, TestCube is a continuous testing platform that leverages Kubernetes to run any kind of test. So it could be functional tests, load tests, performance tests, security tests, compliance tests, whatever. Running them as jobs inside your Kubernetes clusters against your applications and microservices, and then leveraging Kubernetes to scale out your tests if you need to run massive load tests or you need to parallelize your tests, all those kind of things, and then kind of aggregate results and help you to do kind of quality gates and metrics and reporting. And then, of course, integrate that into your CI/CD tooling if you're using more traditional CI, but also like Argo or Flux, like GitOps, CD, or other ways of deploying, and really kind of helping you tie testing, test execution into your software SDLC, however you're doing it, but in a cloud native context. And of course, Kubernetes is core to this, and that's why we're also on the CNCF landscape, right? Because that's kind of really why TestCube shines, because thanks to Kubernetes, it really does run to any kind of test at scale and goes far beyond what you can do today with like GitHub Actions or all the things you can script in your CI/CD platforms. So that was a very quick rundown of what TestCube is. So it's been around 4 years now. There's an open source version. A lot of people using it. There's a commercial version as well. That's kind of how we, put food on the table and keep the company going. And we have, a lot of high-profile customers using it at an enterprise scale, but also a lot of open source customers just using it together in their open source based platforms or that they've built for delivering software.
And if you want to narrow down into a couple of use cases, what do you think where this TestCube shines? Like, is it
Well, there's a lot, obviously, but don't get me started. No, but I think one thing is around it, TestCube being able to run any kind of test, right? So people come to us, they're using Playwright, they're using Selenium, they're using K6, they're using JMeter, so they're using Postman, maybe they're even using SoapUI, right? So they're using a mixture of old tools and new tools. They're maybe migrating from a more like a monolithic CI/CD pipeline from Jenkins, where they're going to GitHub Actions, GitLab, and Argo CD and GitOps. And they also want to do maybe continue like testing as part of their progressive delivery. They're doing canary or blue-green deployments. They want to do tests more on a schedule. So kind of this flexibility of running any kind of test, right, whenever you need to in your software delivery lifecycle. It could be early on in CI while you're building. It could be like while you're deploying. And this is also where vCluster comes in, right, where you creating ephemeral clusters where you're validating your microservices or your services and running integration tests or just component tests. And kind of Testkube really, since it has like a very Kubernetes native way, it works with CRDs and it listens to Kubernetes events and it does all these things that are kind of very core to how applications and infrastructure work in the Kubernetes world. It really shines in how you can integrate testing into more complex like use cases. So our customers are all big, corporations that have hundreds or thousands of engineers. They're using a lot of different testing tools. They're using multiple CI/CD tools, right? So that's really where it shines. If you're just using one testing tool, you're just using one CI/CD tool, you're just building 2 microservices, then maybe Testkube isn't for you. It's really about scale and scaling out your tests. Let's say you're running load tests, you want to run from different regions in the world. We can easily do that with any load testing tool, right? So we can just do a lot of very cool things when it comes out to scaling your testing specifically in a Kubernetes context.
Yeah, so you are built for scale, right? So whenever an organization wants to scale their test systems, might be to performance testing for their infra or because they want to test some applications, CRDs and all. So there's where Testkube shines.
Yeah, also something you mentioned there, infrastructure testing is something we see quite often. We have a CoreWeave as a customer who uses Testkube to test their infrastructure as they dynamically provision like clusters, right, with GPUs. So they provision a cluster, they install the Testkube, an agent to run infrastructure tests just to validate that everything's up and running before they even hand over that infrastructure to the end user that's going to deploy some workloads on that infrastructure. So infrastructure testing, especially now where you have platform engineering, making it easy to dynamically provision infrastructure is also something that's more interesting. And actually in the article that Atul wrote with vCluster and Testkube, there is an infrastructure test using Chainsaw to just validate that components have been deployed correctly. So you could run infrastructure tests to validate like CoreWeave validate that you have GPUs available, but you could also validate that you have network connectivity that you might want, that you have the correct security policies in place, etc., before you even start running your application tests. So we just see a lot of use cases around people needing to do more testing and to do it more integrated into their delivery pipeline. So it's not just one big CI pipeline that builds everything and deploys everything. It's kind of broken down into small pieces where different teams are building different things and deploying, asynchronously, especially with GitOps once again, and kind of having a consistent way to run tests, and then ultimately having one dashboard where you can look at all your test results and do troubleshooting and reporting and all that kind of stuff. It really helps our customers scale their testing activities.
Okay, that sounds interesting. And how do someone who is new to Testkube defines the test? So is there a YAML or is there steps?
There's always a YAML in this world. Yes, so exactly. So people getting started, usually they install the open source agent that we have. They install it in their cluster, and we have we've built a testing workflow engine that's kind of specifically built for running tests, right? So there are a lot of workflow engines out there. You have Argo workflows, and you have workflow engines in your CI/CD providers. This engine is really built for testing, meaning that it's really good at sharding, at parallelization, at doing things that testing tools often want to do. So we have that CRD. So going back to answer your question, usually you'd have to have a test, right? You have a K6 test or a Playwright test. So Testkube is not a testing tool per se. It's more about running the tests that you already have. It could be a unit test. It could be any kind of test. And then what you do is you create a test workflow, as we call it, which then says, my test is in this Git repository. These are the Docker images I want to use to run my test. It could be a Playwright Docker image. It could be a Postman Docker image, whatever you need. And then you'd kind of tie that together in a test workflow, which then when you tell the Testkube agent to run that, it's going to clone the repo, it's going to pull the image, it's going to run the test for you, and then it's going to aggregate the results into a database where you can then query it and kind of look at the logs and artifacts, etc., generated by the test. So but sorry, maybe to get back to your question, yes, there's a YAML, there's a CRD, you write that YAML, there's a lot of examples on our website, and it's all open source, so you can get started without kind of engaging with the commercial part of Testkube until you feel you're ready or you have specific needs that we solve for.
Yeah, I think to add to what Ole said, since I've been exploring Testkube for quite some time. When you spoke about how easy is it to start, I think there are a lot of examples like Ole mentioned. We have written down quite a diverse set of examples in place, and like I said, there is YAML involved everywhere. However, we have examples that you can just click and start deploying. You want to play with K6, you want to play with Chainsaw. We have ready-made examples that you can just directly deploy and use it, or you can bring in your custom test that you have written, which could be part of this thing. Your Git repo. So multiple ways to get started, and all of them fairly easy to get started.
Yeah, and we have examples for almost any testing tool. I think the only thing where we kind of fall short today is hardware, like device testing. Let's say if someone wants to run a test on an iPhone, right? That's going to be hard. There are Android emulators that you can run under Kubernetes, and we also have examples for that. So that's actually possible. They would use Appium or some other framework to run tests against those. But I think the only is if you actually need physical hardware devices is what something that you can't do today. But you can integrate with other tools that do that. So Testkube is really built to also integrate with other tools. It has a REST API. It can emit webhooks that you can kind of send to Slack or send to whatever tool you might want to integrate downstream of tests being run by Testkube.
Awesome. And is there an architecture diagram that we can see on how?
There is, of course, but you're gonna have to give me a second to find a good one in the documentation. Just a second. Sorry, I wasn't really ready for that question, so you have to give me a little bit. So I give you one that's a good one. Here, I think we have one. I don't want to find one that's too.
Do we just want to?
I have.
Oh, you got it. Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can share. Is it this one? No. Yeah, share screen. Okay, I don't want to share the entire screen. I just want to share a window. Is it going to ask me for that? Yes, it is. Okay, cool. So there we go. So high-level architecture of Testkube is, I mentioned there's an agent, and that's kind of the bottom part of this image. The agent is what you install in your cluster, and that cluster could be an ephemeral cluster that you might create with vCluster, right, as part of your ephemeral build processes. And we see this quite a very common use case with our customers is that they generate ephemeral clusters using vCluster or some other technology as part of their builds to kind of validate functionality before things go into down the pipeline. Those agents, you can have as many as you want, installed in as many clusters as you want. And they are, as I mentioned, it's an open source component. It can run by itself. And you interact with that agent through a CLI or a REST API if you want to integrate it somehow. And then there's a control plane, which is our commercial offering, which is kind of something you can deploy on-prem, or we also have a cloud-hosted version, which then manages all your agents and also provides a nice dashboard where you can interact, you can kind of visually create these test workflows, you can run them, you can look at results, you can get like code how to integrate your workflow into GitHub or into whatever you might, Argo CD or Flux or whatever other tools you might be using. As you can see here, you can also, there's an RBAC layer for if you want to do security, integrate with your IDP. I mean, your, not your, well, actually both versions of IDP apply. So I was thinking of an identity provider, but we're also adding backstage support for internal developer portal integration. But at a high level, for getting started open source users, you use the agent, you install that in whatever clusters you want. And then when you want to kind of add that management layer on top, our customers usually install the control plane in their on-prem environment, often in an air-gapped environment. And then that adds a bunch of additional functionality on top for ease of use and management. So it's kind of a high-level architecture. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah, that is exactly what I was looking for. And as we discuss a lot of times, ephemeral environments and all, and so I want to like introduce vCluster on the vCluster Friday stream before we dive deep into demo. So if you aren't aware of vCluster, you have heard about the term a couple of times right now in the stream. It is a way to create cluster in a cluster. So it's a multi-tenancy solution we have, and what we can do with it is create multi-tenant environments across your whole stack, and you have functionalities like sharing your platform stack, as well as improving your developer experience, because you can spin up the environment quickly. Maybe it is for the ephemeral environment, or if it's for CI/CD test environments, so you can do that. So apart from that, it's a popular open source project. So we have the platform which you can use for your UI and all those stuff, as well as a whole single pane of view. But apart from that, there is a core open source component which you can use to create environments quickly. And again, apart from that, you have functionalities like CRD sync, namespace syncs, and all those things, so you can improve the cost overall. So I think next step is we can go with integrating both of them on a small demo. Maybe we can spin up a Minikube cluster, and then we can go forward. So let me share my screen. So yeah, so we will just go and I have a Minikube version 1.36.0, and we'll just create a Minikube start cluster. We have the images pulled, and so it will just wait a couple of seconds to prepare and provision the storage and all the other components. So yeah, so let's check. Yeah, so the Minikube is ready. So if I may ask, what if I want to start installing Testkube from the start, what will be the next step?
Well, so the next step would be to add our Helm repository to your list of Helm repositories, and then just use the Helm install command that we have on our instructions on the website. So I can
You can share it in the comments, so we can post it on.
Sure. Let me see. So
yeah.
I'll just put it in the chat, or where do you want me to put this?
Yeah, chat is okay, and Mike can help us put it on the stream. Yep. So let's add the following Helm repo.
Okay, and then let's see if you can
install it, right?
Yeah.
So using the second command, we'll install the following chart. Okay.
Is it missing? I think you had those backs. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, that's my fault. Maybe this works better. You're gonna have to take away those backslashes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just copy pasted from the website. So
no worries.
So if you just paste the same command that I gave you there, but just remove the backslashes.
Yeah, just doing it.
Okay, I don't know what. Is it missing? So what you could also do, you can use brew. So you can do just brew install Testkube.
Yeah, let's go
Let's see if
through.
that works better.
And this is the CLI, right? Which will
Yeah.
use the master test.
And then you can do Testkube init. Let's see if that works better.
Sure. Yeah, it's downloading finally.
This can take a while.
Install. Fetching the dependencies, which are a couple of them. Upgrading our kubectl as well. Yeah.
Okay, so try just Testkube init.
And should we do in the host cluster, or should we create vCluster before that?
You can create a vCluster before that in your Minikube and make sure that that's the active, that your current context is pointing to that.
Yeah. So we can just name it test cluster. And so as we create vCluster, it will create a namespace called vCluster test. And then it will create the syncer and we'll check the health with health checks. And let's wait for it to come up. And now the init pods are running. So 3 pods. So the Testkube CLI will install all the required stuff, right?
It should, yes. It should set up. It'll basically run the Helm chart. So let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Testkube init is like one of the easiest ways to get things up and running. Just run one command and it just does everything.
Yeah, let me share the another tab. Because there's a proxy running in the background. So if we do kubectl get nodes, it's the Minikube context. And now we are in the vCluster context. And as you see, okay, there is an error.
It's not starting.
Let's check. Yeah. It's running. And it's already connected. Yeah. So the nodes are synced right now.
Okay.
Yep. Now the next command is testkube init.
Yeah. That's it.
So yeah, this is our context.
Yeah.
So we want to continue with this, and it will run the Helm command.
And we will pray. You never know. So if you're running this as part of your CI pipeline, what people would do, or CD, is then that they would run this install command. Or if they're using Argo, they might add the Testkube Helm chart to their Argo deployment or repo. So it's kind of the agent is deployed as part of the application as they're provisioning before they deploy the application, as they provision the infrastructure that the application is going to be deployed in. And this could be under vCluster, which I think the example that Atul worked on is kind of ties all of those things together.
Yeah, the example Atul has is quite humongous, so it will be a very good prod-ready example once we get to that. So I was going through the content, and it was such a nice example with so many moving parts.
A lot of moving parts.
and that is why I've pre-recorded it. I'm like, I don't want to. We all know here that demo gods are, very rarely happy when you're on a stream or when you're showing it live to folks.
Yeah. So, yeah, like right now, the Helm command is something I'm praying for.
Yeah. Just have to give it some time. Maybe can you go to another terminal just to see if it's installing things in it?
Let me check. Yeah, it is installing.
Okay.
So a lot of them are running as well. The API server for Testkube, the Minio Testkube, the Nats, the cert, whatever, all those are in initialization state.
Okay, so it's coming
So
up.
we got to
So under the hood, it uses MinIO and MongoDB for storage. We actually just released a version of this that can use Postgres instead for the database, and Nats for eventing, etc. So there's a bunch of kind of third-party components involved, more in the internal architecture. I did go into that.
Yeah, and I think over time, like Ole said, right, just to add to it, a lot of support for such drop-ins have been added since the time I've been seeing or I've been contributing to Testkube. So like MinIO coming in, and now Postgres is coming in. So essentially, what the project is aiming to do is making it as easy as possible to integrate it with whatever setup you have.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're using A, you're using B, it still supports. So I think that's where we are getting in. I think by the time we are still looking at the Helm command, I'll quickly do a plug sort of over here because since we are talking about open source, and the Testkube repository has quite a good set of examples present, and a lot of people are actually trying it out and putting up the Helm basically the test YAMLs that folks are creating. And that is how the entire example repository is becoming much more richer, right? So anyone can just go ahead and set it up like how we are doing right now. And let's say if they're working on a testing tool that they want to bring into Testkube or run it on Kubernetes, they can just go ahead, run this setup, create a YAML file for the test workflow, and go happy testing. And then anyone can just take those examples and build on top of it. So I think that would be easiest way.
Yeah, the repo is on GitHub, so you can also go to testkube.io, and there's a link to the GitHub repo on the top.
Right.
And then the documentation, so docs.testkube.io has a lot of information on how to, to do the things that we're doing here, but also examples and stuff. So there's plenty of content available. And since the project's been around for a while, you can obviously find a lot by Googling, etc., for how to get started. And so actually,
yes,
looks like the installation worked.
Yep, let's check that. But one of the great things about having an open source project and the open source community is you can get contributions from anywhere. So you can get charts and all those things from everywhere, and you'd never even know how your projects can be used. So that is one of the awesome insights we get with having a awesome project and a community. So as this is running, so what should we do for the next step?
So next step would be to just create a workflow. So once again, we're gonna have to create a YAML file. I don't know if I can paste that entire file to you here, or if I should give you the link to where you can find it. Maybe that's easier.
The link should be awesome.
Yeah, okay, I'll put it here. This is just from our getting started. So there's a YAML file there. So we need to write that to a YAML file.
So this is if we go through
yeah, sure. So this is a workflow. It's a Kubernetes custom resource, right? You can see the resource type. It's calling it ephemeral test. It's just a test. We can see that it's pulling the content of the test from a Git repository. This is from Sonali, who's also been working with us, which contains a K6 test. So this is a simple test. The next line, the container, you can see which container it's going to be using to run the test. So this is from Grafana, the K6 image. And then last, you'll see which steps that'll be taken to actually run the test. So it's just going to do K6 run and on that test that was cloned from the repository. So if the demo gods are with us, you should be able to apply this and just run it. So you can either use kubectl apply or you can use a testkube create test workflow command. I can paste this into the chat. You have to change the name of the file to the file that you created.
So let's try.
Yeah.
The
okay, and then you can do
created.
Yeah, so you can try just do testkube get test workflows. There it is. So it's in there. Okay, now you can run it. So do testkube run test workflow ephemeral test. So the name of the
test.
The name you have it in the table there. Ephemeral test.
Ephemeral test. Yeah.
So what it's doing now is it's cloning that repository, hopefully, and pulling down the Docker image for K6. And it's starting now, and so you see the command. So it started the execution now. So you can copy that command that you have there, watching. Yeah, the one on the line below, exactly. This one, it's probably already finished, but just run that command.
Yeah.
Okay, you can wait. It's running.
Yeah, the image is being pulled.
So yeah, so it's pulling some images, but ultimately, if it'll run that K6 test that it's cloned from the Git repository, and this is kind of the core. So I think if you're getting started, what people usually do, they already have tests, right, using some testing tools. So in this case, it was K6, but they write Playwright, JMeter, Selenium, whatever. You can find examples for all the testing tools almost on the documentation website. So what they do is they take one of the examples and they replace the Git repository path and maybe the actual commands that they want to run, and then they apply that workflow and save it, and then they run it. And then when they're comfortable with that, they can run it, they can get the results, they can get the artifacts, the logs. Next step would then be to automate that execution, maybe from CI/CD, or you can add like scheduling to your workflow so it runs like whenever you want it to run, or you could add commands like a post sync hook to Argo to run this workflow, or that's kind of the next step is not run the workflow manually, but to run it, figure out where in my pipelines and infrastructure do I want these workflows to be executed. And the workflow itself, of course, it's a rich syntax, so you can read about that on the documentation website as well.
And then the other advantage is you can run a lot of tests together in parallel, right, in your cluster.
Yeah. You can run you can run as many tests as you want in parallel. Of course, the only limitation here is what your Kubernetes instance imposes, right? You can also configure for each workflow the resource requests, obviously memory, CPUs, etc. And then there's also functionality for parallelization. So let's say you have a K6 test that you want to run across 10 nodes to generate a lot of load. That's also functionality that we have in our workflow syntax. There's like functionality for sharding if you're doing Playwright tests or Cypress, where you want to kind of split up your tests to run in multiple shards. There's just a bunch of features to help you run tests efficiently. Some of those features require you to be connected to the commercial control plane. Most of them are available just in open source. But it looks like this is taking some time to pull, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to add to what Ole mentioned about running tests in parallel, I think we did a demo some time back where the idea was how it allows us to run multiple tests on the same application at the same time. So I could be running a load test on my web app. I could also run a Postman test to check whether the API is responding or not. I could also run a playwright test and then see whether the UI is functioning as supposed. So at one time, I could run multiple sort of tests on the same application as well as part of the parallelization.
Yeah, so these work great. Thanks for saying that. So these workflows can run, orchestrate multiple types of tests, right? So exactly, and it's a common use case to say, let's run a load test at the same time as an end-to-end test or a functional test, just to make sure that the load doesn't break our functionality, right? So you can easily run any combination of tests, right, in parallel or in sequence. You might want to run a security test at the same time as you run a load test to make sure that performance doesn't compromise your security, or any other way you might want to combine tests to run both in sequence or in parallel. So you have this modularity, you have like each test by itself, but then you can start assembling them to more higher level validations of your system. And maybe those tests you don't run in your CI/CD because they take time. Maybe those tests you run like on a nightly schedule or more manually before you go into production. Or if you're using Argo rollouts, you might put them as part of your rollout strategy to kind of run them to ensure that the rollout is working or not. So there's just once again, since Kubernetes is very close to, since Testkube is very close to Kubernetes, it's very easy to integrate the test execution in wherever you might need it in your pipelines.
Yeah, so with all this, I can think of Testkube as it's like as Kubernetes is a container orchestrator, Testkube is a testing orchestrator for modern enterprises.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think if you kind of have CI and CD, you can think of CT as continuous testing, right? So those three kind of work together, right? CI is focused on building your artifacts, and there might be some testing, unit tests, etc., related to that. But ultimately, the purpose of a CI tool is to build your artifacts, maybe publish them to somewhere. And you have CD, which is the purpose is to deploy into different environments. And CT, continuous testing, where you could use Testkube, but I'm sure you can find other ways to do it, is more about making sure that your tests run continuously in CI, in CD, but also outside of those two steps in your software delivery. And at a whole, you could say this is about continuous delivery, while CD is continuous deployment. So you can always work with words and terminology, but I think what you said is a great way to put it, is that it's about orchestrating tests versus orchestrating containers. So I don't know why this pulling is taking so long, but
maybe it's the bandwidth or something like that. But I think you have a other example as well, so we can go through that in the meantime.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I
I'll hand that
can
over
do
to Atul.
that.
Yeah.
Yes. So I have a video recorded of one of the use cases that we have done, and whatever we discussed until now, right? It's an amalgamation of all of it. What we are doing here. So right now, if you see the screen, what the setup that we have here is a fully blown GitOps example, or continuous testing, or test ops is how we like to term it at times. So what we are essentially doing over here is that we have a vCluster that would be created, as part of the process. And the whole idea here is to enable ephemeral testing, because we all have, realized that testing without or so testing we basically in an existing setup brings in a lot of issues, especially with flakiness, especially with previous test data being left alone. So your next test fails just because there was some existing data or resource contentions or queuing, and that is why the entire landscape is moving towards spinning up dedicated test environments. So as part of your pipeline, so it's completely autonomous and continuous, right? So the demo what I've tried to show is that we have a simple Git repository with a very basic Nginx application. The developer here will actually go ahead and make some code changes or raise a PR, and the moment that happens, we have configured a CI pipeline here, and the pipeline does a bunch of things, which I'll show. I mean, I'll show the file, but at a high level, what it does is it will initially spin up. I have, in terms of components, there is Argo CD. that's actually handling the application which is there in the repo and then deploying it into the vCluster. I have Testkube, which is actually being installed, and then we have vCluster that is actually installing vCluster within the GK cluster host cluster that we have. So the whole flow would be the developer raises a PR. Immediately, our pipeline starts executing. Within the pipeline, it's going to first configure access to the GKE, and then use the vCluster command to create a vCluster. Then we have the Argo CD coming in and then picking up the application from the Git repo and then putting it inside the vCluster. So it'll install that application inside the vCluster. Then we'll have configuring Testkube. So Testkube will, the runner we were speaking about, or basically the thing that you were doing, right? The same thing it will do as part of the CI within the vCluster, and then it is going to test the Nginx application, which is again inside the vCluster. So if you see, essentially what's happening is every time a new change is made to a repository, the pipeline executes a complete dedicated test for it. So whatever features you have, whatever tests you have defined, it is going to run all of it within a dedicated vCluster, and then it's going to strip down everything once the test completes. So if I can just move here, right? So
Yeah. So before we go there, so the initial test which we were running has passed already. So if we can share that screen and show before we go to a more complicated demo.
What a relief.
Yeah, let me show you that. So what it did was it pulled out this image. So there were some issues with pulling this image, and then did all of thing. And
then it cloned the repo, and then you can see here that it triggered K6 to run the actual load test, right? And you could run it again, and Testkube will store the results and the artifacts and the logs generated by your tests, right? So you can easily go back and look at older results. And if you have the dashboard on top, obviously there's a visual way to look at all of these things. So the value really becomes then, how, regardless of how this test was triggered, if it was manually by you, it's from your CI/CD or on a schedule, you have all your results in one place. Your developers have one access point to troubleshoot your tests and to work with the test results, right? So it's kind of that one central place where you run and work with all your tests, right? No matter how you're triggering them. And once again, if you have a very simplistic setup, you're just using one or two pipelines in GitHub Actions, and you're using one testing tool, Testkube will maybe not be for you, right? But as we see this proliferating, right, you have tens and hundreds of pipelines in GitHub, and you've built all this YAML to cobble all this together, and then now you're moving to Argo CD, and you maybe want to start running these tests on a schedule, and you want to start adding some new testing tools, etc. As that scales out, it just becomes a mess to manage, and that's really where Testkube can help, providing that one consistent way, one interface, regardless of how you want to run your tests and how you want to interact with the results over time. And then, of course, it does all the test reporting and all those things that you wouldn't get from a CI tool anyway. Yeah. Sorry, back to you.
No, it's just that we care about that it's passed.
Yes, that's happy.
Now,
well, if you run it again, I'm sure it would be a bit faster because it wouldn't have to clone the image again. So,
okay, so we need to run it, right?
Yeah, you just go back to Testkube run. Yeah, this one, and then you can, if you can add, just watch. You can add follow to that run command. Yeah, so you can see the output. It'll stream the output from the testing tool that you can see here. So it's the K6 test. Yeah, and since it's using Kubernetes, right, it can run any kind of test that can be Dockerized, which is, like I said earlier, more or less anything. Okay, back to you, Atul.
Over to you, Atul, for the bigger example.
Yeah, sure. So what I did easily right now was getting to the GitHub repo, which we have for this demo. So I think that will make a little more sense in terms of what all files that we are having here. So to start with, we have the application with us, which is this KAS folder, and this is where we are just creating an Nginx application. So this is basically your Argo CD application that will be deployed using Argo CD within the vCluster. And if you see here, it's a very simple Nginx application. It's a very basic deployment because we just wanted to show how things work. And then we have defined a test workflow. So like Ole and we discussed earlier, it allows you to run different types of test workflows at one time. So here we have a K6 workflow, which basically, the same thing that you had executed right now. What this is doing is internally, it is actually going to run the test on the Nginx service that is being created, or rather the Nginx service that will be deployed within the vCluster, right? So it is going to test that application which we are deploying. So this is configured to do that. And then if I'm going to come back here, I have the chainsaw test workflow, which does a similar thing. So it is going to run the chainsaw application, and here it is going to verify the infrastructure level stuff. So to look at what exactly it is going to do, we can just show the file here. Okay, yeah. So this is the test. And if you see here in K6, so this is the actual K6, test that we have. So like Ole mentioned earlier also, right? For any tool that you're bringing into TestCube, you might have written some test already for it. So this is the actual K6 test, which is part of the test workflow that TestCube is creating. So if you see here, we are just calling the default service of Nginx that will be created, right? So this is the test for K6. And in the workflow, we have defined, the various configurations that we need for the load that needs to be generated. Similarly, if I come back and show you what we are trying in Chainsaw, so if you see, it is actually just checking the replica count over here. So this is going to ensure that once Argo CD deploys Nginx within the vCluster, Chainsaw is just going to ensure that the deployment has two replicas present. So that's the assert that it's going to do, and this is the file that we just saw. So there are two things happening. One, K6 that is going to run the load on the Nginx application, and then we'll have Chainsaw that is actually going to test the infra part of it. Basically how many deployments it has. Now, in terms of the workflow, this is a test repo, so you'll find bunch of unclean stuff here. But just looking at what's happening here. Basic stuff, it'll run when a PR is raised, and initially it does the setup of connecting with GKE. It connects to that, and then it installs the CLI that is required. So since we are interacting with vCluster, we install the vCluster CLI. We also do the Argo CD CLI, and then we just check what are the existing stuff here. We do some pre-flight cleanup. Because I've been a tester early in my career, I know how important it is to clean the environment, starting it on a clean slate. So we have the cleanup here. We ensure that everything within the vCluster is clean, even though the cluster and the entire thing is starting up immediately. We just ensure things are just clean, and then we have the Argo CD setup. We have the vCluster setup, and we are creating a namespace here within which the vCluster is created, and this is based on the PR that is raised. So every PR that is raised, you have a unique namespace within which you'll have the vCluster that will be created, and then we'll set up vCluster for Argo CD connectivity, so that Argo CD can see the vCluster and then actually deploy my application within the vCluster. So this bunch of configurations for it, and then we'll configure it to deploy the application in the vCluster. So we have the settings, configuration for that, and then eventually once the connection is ready, it is actually going to create the application. So if you see here, this is the application that we were creating, the K8S, the Nginx deployment. So Argo CD will now go ahead and create that application within the vCluster. Then we have a verification, and in verification, we'll see how it verifies just to ensure that the application is deployed correctly. It is going to check all the services for Nginx application that's deployed. And then we have the setup of Testkube over here. So, the same thing that you have executed earlier to run the Testkube. So we create a namespace for Testkube, and then we go ahead and, install Testkube over here. So we define, the runner name that's supposed to be here, basically for ease of identification, we define the namespace. A couple of labels here so that it becomes easier to understand where this test was executed from, what was the environment, things like that. So right now, the K6 that you executed on the vCluster as part of your demo, you saw a table with a few blank columns. You can define the labels here, and that will just populate. It makes it easier for you to track what's happening. And then we are just going to go ahead and run the test. So here, if you see, you would have seen this command that we executed, Testkube run test workflow case example. And again, we are adding some tags, and that is again optional, but it's a good practice to add tags so that you are able to actually track what's happening in terms of your test workflows. So we have added tags like environment, what is the test, what PR it is associated with, so I know exactly what triggered this particular test workflow. uh, and then yeah, so basically it's going to run the test workflow one by one. So we have K6 running first, then it is going to run the chainsaw once that is complete. And then it's going to collect all the logs for me and then upload it at a place. And then I'll be able to download the particular logs and see what's happening. So if I can quickly show you what happens, this was the file explanation. And right. So here a PR is raised by a developer. He just creates a new file, and the PR is created. And since this action or workflow is configured to this, it's going to execute immediately. So you can see the execution has started, and then we have defined all these steps that we just went through earlier. So it is going to follow all of this, and eventually it is going to come and perform. So it's now configuring Argo CD here, and once the Argo CD setup is done, it is actually checking the status of Nginx deployments, whether it's completed or not, and then eventually it is going to execute. So now here it is actually connecting to vCluster for the Testkube connectivity, and it is going to. So a lot of debugging steps are here because again this is a demo, so we have added a lot of print statements here so that you know what exactly is happening in here. But then that's completely configurable, and yeah, you will see. So here, if you see within the vCluster, you can see we have the Nginx namespace, that is the deployment Argo CD created. We had the Testkube namespace, which is created for Testkube. Again, now we saw that the Testkube is running correctly here. The status is running, and now it's just going to start executing the K6 test that we just provided. And you will see the same exact things here, right? So this basically is a very short and quick example of essentially, implementing test ops or continuous testing as we defined earlier. As part of your CI pipeline that you have, you spin up ephemeral clusters, you deploy your application to it, you enable Testkube to orchestrate whatever test you have, test executes, you get all the logs, you can configure it to dump it to an S3 or, wherever you want those logs to go. And then your test will complete, and then your, entire ephemeral environment is stripped down, and you have a new fresh test again, a new PR comes in. So yeah, that's what I had to quickly show on the demo that we had.
Yeah, a big demo with.
Yeah, it's a big demo. So we should share the link to that repo. It's an impressive, it's a lot, but
Yeah.
really shows the power of vCluster. Obviously, in Argo with the GitOps approach, and then Testkube, kind of all of these things coming together. All right, and it took some time to set up, but now that it's up there, it really enables a very continuous loop for working with your application code and making sure it's tested.
Yeah. So Ole, if before I end the stream, I had a question. So you have been dealing with a lot of testing and all those things. So what do you think are the new trends in this ecosystem? Like what type of infra people are trying to test, and how are companies trying to optimize testing?
Well, I'll have to say AI. So AI is everywhere, right? So AI is definitely having an impact on testing as well. So both on the side of helping AI to generate tests, right? Just you could obviously ask any copilot or prompt to generate like a playwright test or a K6 test. So I think that's what people are doing. Generating tests from requirements is super interesting, right? Just let's say you've defined your requirements somewhere, you say, hey, create a playwright test for these requirements. So that's something we're seeing. Another flip side of people using a lot of AI is that there's a lot more code being created, right? People are feeling very productive with AI, at least for now. So how do you make sure that testing you keep up with testing all the code that you're generating through AI? So and as much as we'd love to trust the code that AI generates, we all know that sometimes things go wrong, and so it's really important to have testing in place. If you're using AI heavily and also using AI maybe to automatically augment your pull requests or doing major refactors, and although I'm sure people are manually reviewing, things can always slip through the cracks just when you're doing things without AI. So I think AI is kind of pushing testing both directly and indirectly. And it'll be super interesting to see how it plays out. I'm similar to with coding. I don't think AI will replace testers, but I'm sure it will augment the process around creating tests and running tests and all those things. And so, of course, something we're also doing in Testkube is using AI to analyze logs and help you understand why your tests failed and that kind of stuff. And actually, a little bit of a teaser. We're actually releasing an MCP server for Testkube reasonably soon, which is very, very cool, that you can kind of from inside your, if you're using Claude or whatever, you can ask it to run tests for you. You can create the test, and then you can ask it to run that test. So you create a K6 test to test this, and I'll run this K6 test in that cluster, and it'll automatically figure out, kind of create the workflow for you, deploy it for you, run it for you. So there's just a lot of very, very cool things you can do on top of that, but ultimately there's you have to know what you're doing and all of that, like with anything. So I think AI is obviously going to impact how people do testing. I think maybe that's one of the biggest trends, shifts that we're seeing right.
Yeah, we are also focusing a lot on AI nowadays, the infrastructure for AI, and we are planning a couple of releases like private nodes, in which we allow people to bring their nodes for specific GPU workloads and all. So we will link about the launch series in the comments.
Yeah,
And
that's very cool.
to conclude, thank you, Ole and Atul, for
thank you for having
this
us.
edition of vCluster Friday. It was nice having you all and discuss testing, this Testkube, and how vCluster integrates with your testing lifecycle with Testkube.
Thank you so much for having us, Hrittik. It was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Hrittik. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you for the CNCF birthday event.
I can't match that. It was great seeing you.